Hey, this is Chadillac, and you're here with the Cage Rage podcast. Welcome to the show. I'm excited about this one today. We're going to take a walk down memory lane. It is history time in boxing for all you pugilist fans out there. I'm here with boxing expert, analyst, historian, archivist, and expert of all trades, Miguel. Miguel, how are you doing there in Costa Rica today?
Good. Very happy to be here and happy to join the CRP here for Boxing History Podcast. One of my favorite things to do.
Hey, and on the side of Miguel, we're doing something a little different today. We wanted to bring another expert in because we know the love of his Ali and Frazier romance that he's got. So we're bringing in Anthony Scott Pyatt. Anthony, what's going on?
Good to see you guys. Good to be with you. Always a pleasure, Miguel, Chad, and happy to always talk about Ali and Frazier and their great matchups. Miguel and I talked about pretty in-depth the third fight at one point. Let's talk about that second one now.
Okay, so here we go. Miguel, take it away. Dates, times, where do you want to start at?
Well, we're talking about the second fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. And I mean, in boxing history, especially when you talk about, what you have documented boxing history, also what you have in terms of video and stuff like that. I think head and shoulders, we're talking about the greatest trilogy of all time. The trilogy having a special place in boxing as well, right? So, you've got more modern trilogies that people look at and things like that. Trilogy usually means a war, in some way, shape, or form, if things haven't been settled, right? So now when you get to the second fight, now here, really things are politically in a very interesting situation because Ali's back and he's looking, he's won every fight since he lost to Frazier. And Frazier at this point has sustained his first loss to Foreman. So they're going to do a rematch of their fight. Now, Frazier being one of the few people who's beaten Ali, right, 2 Olympic gold medalists and stuff, they're going to meet for the second time in Madison Square Garden, and that's the fight that we want to celebrate. And, the main thing here is, you get the Rumble in the Jungle with Foreman, and then you get the Thrilla in Manila, which is the third match between these guys. And, you've got Ali here pretty much at the peak of his showmanship and powers, right? So with Frazier, you've got a guy who's beaten him coming into this fight, and there's no belt on the line because Frazier had lost the belt. So right now they had a minor belt on the line, an NABF title, but it wasn't for a world title fight. So this one was a 12-round fight. And, Scott, what do you remember about the fight?
What do I remember about being 1 year old when this fight happened?
Well, I was a kid myself, and I got to be honest, I don't. My first recollections of Ali were his losses, later on in his career.
Sure.
Me too. I know I'm a lot older, but I was like 4. So
yeah, I mean, I was coming in at probably something like 10 months old at this point. But having said that, I've obviously watched the fight and gone back and watched, all these fights. And it was great. And what I remember too, not just from the build-up, and this is something you don't see when you just look up the fight, but if you see some documentaries or you're able to go back and talk to folks that saw it, you're going to see a lot of the political issues that were going on, a lot of the, the sort of the trash talking too. Let's not forget that they went 5 days before the fight. They went and were on Wide World of Sports again, and they were talking about the fight, and they were talking about the building. When they get to the 11th round of the first fight, Ali's, starts his talking smack, and that's where he famously called Frazier ignorant. And Frazier gets up, gets in his face. Ali stays in his chair, but Frazier gets up and gets in his face, and why are you calling me ignorant? How am I ignorant? And really gets upset about it. And that truthfully did cause him pain in his, outside of the ring, in his life with his family and friends, and the way it affected his ego and whatnot. So there was a lot of tension there going into this, and there was racial tension. I mean, I know they're both black fellas, but there was the idea that Frazier was the one holding the line for the status quo. and Ali being, more radical, not Cassius Clay anymore, Ali being more radical. So, I like the idea of what's going on outside of the ring before they even step into the ring. And it's a non-title fight, as you said. Some people thought, well, these are two former champions, maybe past their prime and whatnot, but then we still have a heck of a fight when you get in. And that fight, I think, is made better because of the personal stuff. And I don't think Ali felt great about that in the long run. Sometimes we say things and they help build up fights, or we say things to our friends and whatnot. But when we later realize how much it hurt them, then sometimes we have some readjustments, if you will. And I think he came around later in life and tried to help Frazier out and tried to be, more of a statesman and a sportsman and friendly to him later in the time. So I did just want to point out that in the media, there was a lot of buildup with this fight that was personal rather than talking about, jabs and crosses and hooks. We were talking about, race and culture. And, let's not forget, Frazier won that first fight, but he spent about a month in the hospital afterwards. So, it wasn't a scarless win for Frazier on that first fight. He was in the hospital for a month. So taking that into effect, and then how you and I covered the third fight where it just was brutal and he had to end up quitting, that's sort of where we're at with that. That's the lead up to the fight. A lot of tension.
Guys, one of the things we often talk about on the historic on the historic shows is racial tension, racial lines that we cross. Race seems to come up all the time, along with the political aspects of where we were at with things, and they're inseparable, really, from that time until now. So, two things. Number one, who was holding the belt at that time? And number two, Miguel, how do you feel about the whole racial tension? And what did that lend to this fight as far as ticket sales, as far as how the promotion promoted the show, as far as how the audience separated and divided to pick whom they were looking for or who they wanted to win? Tell me about that a little bit. Go into that too. Tell me the details on that.
Well, I can tell you that the holding the belt right now was the feared George Foreman, who had clobbered Frazier in a couple of rounds to take the belt. So Frazier was coming off, that loss, and Ali was coming off a nice streak heading into this fight. And it was thankfully, in the 70s, and this is the kind of thing that, I think guys my age, guys Scott's age, this is something we can pass on to guys younger than us and stuff. Here you can really take advantage because thankfully these guys are very well documented. You can, even if you sit on YouTube and start looking for stuff, you can find Joe Frazier albums. He recorded music, it's some cool stuff. There's a couple of songs I actually know by heart because I used to play them in the office to be goofy, and it's like old time, 70s kind of lounge music, I guess. I don't even know what kind of music you would call it, So Frazier fancied himself a singer, you got the Decon Roach commercials and many TV shows, appearances on What's My Line, appearances on, I forget where it was, where they had to guess who the personality was. And, like these guys were beyond what celebrities are now in boxing because, I know Terrence Crawford's out there, but Terrence Crawford's not, on game shows, or on variety shows. They did the Dick Cavett show and bunches of old time shows where you can look up, I found, I think it was Stony Brook University in the 70s had experimented with their own radio station and stuff, and they had some dude that did interviews with like people from that time, and he did like 3 hours sit down with Ali. I mean, there's a lot of documented stuff with these guys, and there's a reason why. The reason I'm telling you about it is because we call it the greatest trilogy of all time. And I think, if you're 20 and skeptical, it'll hold water. Just look up the shit. Do the work. Don't wait for somebody to do a meme on it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're looking at 2 of them were title fights, So they were 15 rounds each back then. So there's your 30 rounds. Then this one was a 12 round. So you're looking at 42 rounds between these guys. Well, excuse me, I guess Frazier didn't come out for the 15th in the last fight. So 31 rounds, or 41 rounds, as it were. Yeah, and to answer Chad, going back, Foreman did have the belt at this time. Very surprising in Jamaica. Is the first fight on HBO. We actually talked about that in our history one, where Howard Cosell famously said, "Down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier." So Foreman has the belt at this time, which it only before the fight took away a little bit of the luster, if you will. But as Miguel points out, they're on the Dick Cavett show, and they're on Wide World of Sports, and they're on the Tonight Show. I mean, sort of Johnny Carson type shows, all those sorts of things. So the hype was still there, and then the fight proved for it itself. And the demand for the third one was built in after this second one, I would say.
And to go back and touch a little on the racism part now, it's a delicate subject. It's an interesting subject. It's one that I think needs a lot more conversation at a lot of different levels. But I will say that in the 60s, racism was a lot more complicated than in 1910. You know what I mean? It's like in 1910, it was pretty clear cut. Every white guy was pretty much had a little streak of racism or had a race in the face. It was much more overt, but it was still there. And I think in the 60s, I think the interesting thing is about it that Scott touched on is that Ali played the race card in the talk before this, calling Frazier and Uncle Tom and stuff like that. And a lot of that, Frazier was no, I don't think Frazier was an Uncle Tom, you know what I mean? Frazier is nothing. Frazier was a proud black man from Philadelphia. And Muhammad Ali chipped away at that with his, Islam credentials and stuff like that, like he's more black, And so it was a twist that I think shows the genius and danger of a guy like Ali, right? I mean, Ali did change Frazier's life with that kind of talk. He changed trash talking in sports for the rest of all time. You know what I mean? And I do think in his older age, and Frazier and him being friends, I do think he probably regretted a little bit of that, crossing the line and stuff. But, when you're young, you don't think about that stuff.
Well, let me ask you.
And I think that, white people, viewing this fight, I think you could go either way with who they wanted, who they like to win. Philly guys may have been with Joey. Ali maybe had a lot more vitriol, aimed his way and stuff. But Ali had a weird way of elevating things and things like that. And I think playing the racist card here, it was, something that kept the media off balance too. You know what I mean? It's like, if they're sitting there in the hotel and he's putting pressure on Frazier, he might use the N-word. Now, as a white reporter, could I print it in the 60s? Has the atmosphere changed at that point? How do you react to that? So, I don't know, like I said, I'm not an expert. I just know that it was a lot more complicated. But I think that Ali used that, too, to keep the white media and the media and people at bay as well. It just was... the kind of thing I think put people off guard and unexpected. And it shows. I wish it was something besides racism that Ali had done. I don't know, but it was the race card that he played, and it kept a lot of pressure off him.
So let me ask you guys. This goes for either one of you and both of you. Do you feel like part of the reason that Ali pulled that card was that Frazier was not quite as educated, as intellectually gifted as Ali was? He certainly didn't have the vernacular that Ali had. Do you think Ali maybe wasn't picking on him as much as he was trying to make a statement to the world, and Frazier happened to be the sounding board from which he used to get that point across? Or was it that he was trying to say, "Hey Joe, wake up"? Or was it something else? Take off on that for a second. I know we're off a little bit, but it's interesting enough. I want to know.
No, I think, with the second fight, there's still a lot of animosity there. And they wouldn't get over that until, they were older men. And Ali was I think he was the guy who threw the kitchen sink in there. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize about the level of competitor he was and always was. This is a guy who, aside from boxing and stuff like that, you might want this guy next to you in a ditch in World War One too. I mean, it's a different kind of fight. But this guy was a fighter to sit back and take Foreman's punishment and think that through. This guy was a different kind of fighter. He was a guy who considered the fight started when the contract signed, I think, especially with a rival like Foreman. So it was game on. And when he went that way and saw the reaction, I don't want to talk about education or vernacular or any of that stuff, but what I think you can credit Ali with here is the charisma to know when a camera is on and the ability to work with the camera. Not everybody has that.
Yeah.
You can get people with a remarkable story that are just kind of flat on camera. You know what I mean? And I think Foreman was, Frazier was a guy who maybe was a little more like not enamored with the camera, not enamored with the, So he was a guy you could catch and make him look dumb with a quick question, whereas Ali would throw one right back at you, and then from there people judge. And we don't know them. Right. I don't know them that way. I think Frazier definitely was a quality man in many, many ways, and I think Ali and proud because he knew it, and I think, his family was all in fighting and things like that. He had, a Philly, to make him question himself, Ali won the fight before the fight.
Well, that's it. That's what it comes down to. That's, whether you're talking about the Book of Five Rings or the Art of War, it's winning the fight before you even start it. If you know your opponent and know yourself, you don't lose in 100 matches. If you know yourself but you don't know your opponent, you're going to be 50-50. If you don't know yourself, you shouldn't be in the game, obviously. So I don't believe, looking back on it, I think it was more about the hype than it wasn't a personal attack, on Frazier. I think Ali would find things that were inflammatory, that were catchy, that were sound bites before maybe even sound bites was the catchphrase. These sound bites that he knew would play well, you see. But he knew these sound bites would play well. And also there was a little bit of throwing stuff out and seeing what sticks. I mean, he was grabbing insults and ideas and brags and things out of the spaghetti bowl and just throwing them on the wall until something sticks. And when it sticks, it's ready, you see. So the calling Frazier these sort of things like you're the white man's fighter, that stuck. So he kept throwing more of it because more of it stuck and more people would come to interview him and hype the fight up bigger. Yeah.
So okay, so that leads me to this question then, guys. In your opinions, did more people go towards Frazier? Did more Caucasians go towards Frazier because of Ali's comments, or did they stay with Ali? Was there a racial divide there that more white men went to Frazier based on that or not? Do you guys have an opinion on that? I know that's academic and it's difficult to answer, but is there an answer to that?
Both is the answer. The thing is, it doesn't matter if he pushed some people to become hardcore Frazier fans and some people to become hardcore Ali fans, because they're all hardcore Frazier Ali fight fans at that point. You see what I'm saying? They all want to watch the fight. They don't. So what? They hate Ali. They want to see him get beat up. They're going to watch. They hate Frazier. If they love Frazier, if they love Ali. So the love-hate dynamic of all that, Ali was smart enough to know that it doesn't matter if you like me or not. It just matters if you want to watch me.
Right. My grandfather was a huge Ali fan until he changed his name. When he was Cassius Clay, he loved him. When he changed his name, my grandpa turned his back on him. He felt like Ali had turned his back on the nation. It wasn't about race. It was about turning his back on the nation as far as my grandpa was concerned. I don't know. It was that generation and how they felt about things like that. I don't have an opinion on it one way or another. But a guy can do whatever they want with their name. But Do you guys have any comments on that?
I mean, again, I think you're talking about iconic people at this point, right? So, cut that out. I'm gonna ramble. So go ahead, take it away, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, same thing.
Let's do this. Let's get back to the fight.
I know what I was going to say.
Just cut that whole question out for now, because I don't have a great answer for it either. So, Aaron, edit, cut.
Talk about the person.
Like the jab, which was his major weapon.
I want to talk about the purses.
Okay, go ahead, Miguel.
And before we start back, I have questions for you, Miguel, about the scoring back then.
Yeah.
I know you're a judge, so I have some questions about that. Feed me that, Chad, or just ask me if I have anything else to ask, because I do.
Okay. Go ahead, Miguel, and take off with your you want to talk about the person.
Yep. I think when you're looking at the hype that both guys were producing for this fight, I think Frazier had already become a businessman too, and they were making big purses for the time of $5 million and that sort of stuff for these fights and things. And I think that became a premium. I think when you do the research and you're looking up at it too, there's a lot of contentious negotiations heading into these fights. Because I think now that we look back at it, it's hard to weigh, but you really I felt it when Ali passed away, because you could see the generation before me. I think the reverence was like, really something I hadn't seen before for a dude. It was like, what was what's the biggest event in boxing this year? And it was like, well, Ali died. And it was like, to a 60-year-old guy, he had transcended that level, and and you really felt that respect. So at that point, they both knew that, and they wanted to maximize their money. And there you're just talking about facts, Frazier's got a family. Frazier's family boxes. That implies gyms and training and Olympics and discipline. And I think Frazier, had his little entourage of people, an uncle here, he gets a salary and this and that and this. So $5 million can go fast even back then.
Yeah.
Ali, multiply that maybe by 300 with entourage and, giving money away and all the stories that you hear about him. But at the same time, I think part of that Ali could use as justification to be like, we are two black men making a lot of money for this. So all things are out the window as long as we get paid. And in the future, if you go way down, and this is off to the side, but there's a comedian named Cat Williams that used to be involved in doing the roasts and things, and he had to do a roast, I think it was for Flavor Flav, and it was racist shit. And he said to Flavor Flav, he said to him, how could you? You know what I mean? And Flavor Flav said, motherfucker, they gotta pay me. And at the end of the day, it comes down to money, I think. In Ali's mind, I think Frazier not went along with it, but because it wasn't like a fight breaker, because at the end of the day, they were getting to get the payday, so they put up with a lot too. I think there's certain things you put up with, when money talks. I don't know that that's pretty or anything, but I think that that is involved. This was the biggest thing going, and everybody was going to watch it.
Well, I think it's safe to say that if you don't have money, that racial barriers will never be broken without the money being there as well. So, for whatever that's worth. Hey, Scotty, you had some questions about judging. Tell me about that real quickly.
Yeah, and Miguel, I know you've judged some 68 boxing matches or something to that effect. Correct me where I'm wrong on that number, but I've been stalking your record a little bit, and I would love to get into talking to you about boxing judging on another episode. Let's preface that real quick right now. I'd like to talk about, so that we can teach the boxing public how it's different from WBO to WBC sometimes, how one state could be different to another, how a judge can like the total number of hits versus a heavy hit. How much do a power punch, how much is that worth? How you can score points for dodging. You can actually get a point for not getting hit. These are all things that if you just look at what they call CompuBox numbers nowadays, and well, this guy landed 38 punches, that guy landed 32 punches, the 38 guy won, right? Well, they were 38 sort of jabs, and the other guy landed, 25 of his 32 were to this guy's gut and about knocked him out. There's a difference between that. So I would love to get into the overall thing. My specific question about this fight for you, Miguel, is twofold. When did the 10-point must system become the standard? Because when I look at this scorecards, they scored it just an A for Ali or an F for Frazier. There was no 10-8 for a knockdown and things like that. It was either Ali or Frazier. We had Tony Castellano as a judge, Jack Gordon as a judge, and Tony Perez, the referee. So that's the other question. You got the referee scoring, not three judges that are sitting ringside. The ref is scoring, which the positive side, he's close to the action. The negative side, he's got other stuff to do besides score the fight, So I can see why they went away from that. But the total scores on this were Tony Castellano, they had one draw. Two of the one judge and the referee had a draw in the fourth. So your totals were Ali winning 7-4-1, 7-5-0, and then Tony Perez, the referee, 6-5-1. Almost a draw completely. So that's kind of my question. What happens if there was a knockdown when all you scored was an A for Ali or an F for Frazier? Did the knockdown not count as a 2-point round back in those days? Enlighten me a little bit here, Miguel.
They're just giving the winners of the rounds.
Okay.
And the referee was one of the judges. So the referee was ref/judge. That still happens at times in boxing. Depends on the commission. Depends on the level. It tends to happen in the lower levels where, if you watch in England in the 4-round fights and 6-round fights there, many times it's just the ref now that makes the decision. So it's just one judge, and it's the in-ring referee. I think that's a difficult thing. I think that at a higher level at this point there's a little bit of an acknowledgement that it's a different job. So they have a third judge and the ropes there. But I think the boxing commissioners are free to do whatever they want, and that's always going to be the case here. So what happens here in the case of the Ali fight? Gordon was the veteran. If I'm not mistaken, it was his last fight that he judged. If not, he was just about done. And then the other two guys would referee into the next century, or judge into the next century, right? So, but they were already well placed, and you get a nice position when you get a world title fight. When the ref and the judge is there, they tell you, hey, I've done 45 world championship fights of this type and stuff like that. So. They select, the fighters have some input, the teams have some input. There's some type of process there where, we really have something against this guy. The commission takes that into account when they name the fights. But the commissioner will have to name the boxing judges and the rules. For matches such as this, they're named in advance, right? Especially nowadays, you'll get the word of it in advance. What I don't like about the system is I think there's really very little accountability as a judge, It's like there should be a point where the person, if you're a good judge and you have a different opinion than me, then I would like to hear why. Because if you're a good judge, you'll be able to, you'll be able to tell me, well, I saw it this way. Maybe it was the angle, but when he had him caught on the ropes, I saw he landed a couple of heavy punches that made the difference. I didn't have that angle because I was over here. All right, I feel like you gotta be open to reason. But when you get people who can't justify what's going on or wide problems across the board on a card, and you don't have a judge being held accountable, you have commissioners that come and say, "Oh no, that judge is a great judge, and we use him for MMA." And I'm not kidding around that we're talking about Adelaide Bird, for example.
Adelaide Bird, of course.
You know what I mean? But it's but that's the situation. Is the boxing commissioners do have a lot of leeway, and a lot of it is still the buddy system. And the buddy system has to do with when the world title fight rolls in, and the referee who may make $300 to referee a match is now going to get a little envelope on the side. Then they probably buck for a position and need to have a pecking order so that they get all that stuff allocated correctly. Now, in addition to that, there's also a whole clerical process if you're a ref, that you kind of got to play along. So everybody's got this little like clubby thing that they do because you got to renew your license every year. You know, so that means, you got to write a $75 check or have it in at the commission where they waive the fee for you because you've been around for a while. I don't know how all that works, but you do have to keep your license. If you're going to go to Nevada and you're licensed in New Jersey, then you are going to have to sit down, fill out a form, and do that, or at least get the paperwork taken care of as well. You know, I'm sure with the guys that know each other, that flows, but there's that whole thing, and it makes it like a little clubby kind of group now, and I think it's evolved from that. I think back then you had more real boxing guys, boxing guys that had worked their way up and been judging and maybe been boxing themselves, et cetera, and blah, blah, blah. So, I think, boxing judging has evolved in the wrong direction.
Well, let me speak to that real quick. Go ahead.
So one of the things that Scott asked was the nuance in this fight probably went to Ali because Frazier, he's kind of the head down slugger. So Ali wins a lot of those rounds on the nuance of not getting punched. He wins the nuance of being able to feint and to move and to dance around and to do all the things that aren't necessarily about hitting somebody, but about defense and about not getting hit. So where are you at on that with the judging then, Miguel? Do you agree with where the judges were at on this fight? Do you think they called it right?
Yeah, I do. I think they called it right. I don't have a problem with. Here's the thing about judging. Judging is a very subjective thing. When I judge a fight, there's one thing I look at to see, if I'm going to give more credit to a guy doing that, and if it's harder to do in boxing than in MMA, because in boxing it's harder to finish a fight. But I do want to see a guy. I would credit a guy a little more if I see in the 12 rounds he's looking to finish a fight. He had the guy hurt. He went after him instead of sitting back and seeing how he comes out the next round and taking some of that stuff. Trying to finish a fight has some value to me. But that doesn't always happen in boxing. It becomes a game of attrition, and you've got to get it down to the basics and things, of what you're judging there. In which case, you have to judge, aggression and offensive moves that, especially of quality. You can have a range of the quality, but that I think trumps, good defense. Unless you're seeing something miraculous where, a guy throws 100 punches, misses all of them, and the other guy throws one punch and knocks him down. You're always going to have, some weird ways to look at things. But I think you gotta look at the offense first. Once it breaks down beyond just are you getting off punches that are landing, then there's like ring generalship. Then you can count, are you keeping the center of the ring? Are you putting your opponent on the ropes? So you take advantage of those situations. To me, if you get your opponent on the ropes and you can let the guy get out of there, it's almost like getting a takedown and letting the guy get up again.
Yeah.
You've had the guy in the position, or you work the guy in the corner, you cut the ring off, you've got him there, and boop, boop, he hits you first, and he's out of there again. Man, that's like a blown takedown to me. You know what I mean? Or something you didn't do what you should do with the position, Yeah.
So you get 3 points, right? 3 points for the takedown and 1 for the escape back in my wrestling days coming up, right? You still get more credit for getting him against the ropes, but he gets a little something for getting out quickly, too. I see what you mean there.
If you consider MMA, my favorite set of rules were the old Shudo rules, where Shudo had a catch.
Yeah.
So, that does is it gives you credit for a near submission, but it also sort of credits the guy playing defense in some way because he got out of a near finish.
Yeah.
So there's actually a measure for that in MMA in certain of the rule bases. They threw that out in the unified rules now and don't have a catch, but you do see it where a guy gets a takedown and does nothing with it or stands him up, and you're frustrated because the position didn't go from there. In boxing, an equal of that is when you have the guy in the corner and maybe you don't get the offense off that you want. Then you can credit maybe the other guy for doing good work and putting himself in a better position. Then how do you turn the fight around where you're back on offense and not on defense and things? So I think offense trumps all. I'd like to see a guy. I credit more of a guy when he's trying to take your head off than when he's trying to pitter patter and point his way to a victory. It's one of the reasons why, I could judge every fight for Floyd Mayweather and not like doing it. You know what I mean? It's not as appealing the style when there's no objective to finish. He's not trying to, and when it shows to that level, I don't know. It never affected his judging because no one judged him. Hey, he's not doing anything. I'm not giving him this fight. I guess, that never happened. But I guess other lesser fighters who aren't as elite as him may be susceptible to that.
So you talked about ring generalmanship, and pertaining to this fight, Frazier he's your go-getter, so he is pushing Ali against the ropes. He is the guy that's coming forward. But he really doesn't get the points for generalmanship that maybe he should, right? And so explain why that is to the audience. Tell them kind of how that works, how Ali takes ring generalmanship, and he actually takes it away from Frazier and wins those rounds without being the guy that's the aggressor. You guys talk about that for a minute if you can.
Let me throw my 2 cents in real quick before I kick it to Miguel. A lot of what Ali did in Frazier's camp complained about in all 3 fights, mind you. They complained about it after the first, and it happened in the second, and they complained about it again, and it still happened in the third to a slightly lesser extent. That hunched over stalking style of Frazier was largely negated with straight punches from a little bit outside by Ali, and when Frazier would get in, Ali would tie him up. He was just a little bit taller and would reach over and just sort of tie up Frazier. So Frazier's stalking, which might look good and might look like he's controlling, but because his head's down, it doesn't look as strategic. It doesn't look like he's actually controlling it. He's rushing in, but that's not control, you see, because Frazier was actually controlling it. I mean, Ali was controlling it, my bad. Not in a pretty way, though, but would hit him on the way in, score some points. When he's actually in, tie him up. The ref will scoot you apart again, and now Ali can use his longer punches to score a few points, and if Frazier gets ticked and comes rushing in like a bull again, grab the bull by the horns and shut it down, and the ref will split it up. So there wasn't as much control just because he was moving forward. He actually wasn't controlling the fight.
Yeah.
Frazier was Ali was controlling the fight almost by grabbing as much as by punching, but it worked.
Let me be clear about one thing, okay? And this is important when you're talking about judging. If you judge, even on an amateur level, like you like to watch the fights and keep a card, that's the only way you can do it. It has to be live, and you have to be watching it live and keeping the scorecard with the fight as it goes on. I've heard other people, you watch it afterwards. If you know the result and you watch it afterwards, I know, I turned the volume down, or I'm just giving my opinion, I'm being, none of that counts because you already know the result. So it has to be pure. Now, with that purity involved, then, it's hard for me to really talk about how I would judge that fight. But the general impression to me is that Frazier was having to do a lot of work, that Muhammad Ali was more efficient holding him off with the jab. We talked about the jab, his jab. Here's an all-time jab. The jab, I can hit Frazier with a jab. I'm going to gamble if I hit Frazier with a jab, Frazier's going to keep coming because my jab didn't do anything. You know what I mean? But it takes something when Ali hits you with a jab where Frazier was doing a lot of work to get inside, and then again getting frustrated on the way in. So yeah, I think ring generalship is not just boring forward. You do have to analyze everything that's going on there, and I do think that's something where, in that fight, without having watched it, for this podcast it does, but in that fight, it's almost like, did Frazier make the adjustments he needed to make, to get inside and be more effective and stuff, or did it stick the same way because Ali was successful and Frazier didn't have the answer in that at certain points, Did it break down to that? That would be Ali's ring generalship, even if he was up against the ropes, at times taking punish. It negates that. So there's a lot to it. In this fight, I can very easily see ring generalship going to Ali. Live, I didn't see it live, obviously. So, but in retrospect, because of the way Ali Frazier's having to do too much work to get his punches off, and that's inefficient. The other guy's much more efficient. That weighs itself.
Okay,
Absolutely.
guys.
If
So
you talk about that style, sorry, Chad. If you talk about that style real quick, it brings up a fighter like Sergey Kovalev, who at the time we're fighting this, he's fighting tomorrow. But at any rate, February 2nd, 2019, in Kovalev, and that's sort of to me what Frazier's problem was when he fought Ali. In other words, Frazier had a style, he had a favorite style, he had a most effective style. Ali could mix it up. I mean, he would purposely do rope-a-dope, or he would control or whatnot. And both, like a guy like Kovalev and Frazier, they're best when they're stalking someone down and they're using their power punching and whatnot. So what Ali did was adjust a little bit from fight to fight, do what works well, and bring some other things that are going to work better. Whereas Frazier needs to just keep what he's good at. That's the same with Kovalev, the crusher Kovalev. You look, he loses to Andre Ward, he comes back. Did he make adjustments? No, he actually looked worse in the second fight against Andre Ward than he did in the first fight. He didn't make those adjustments. And that with the lighter Alvarez beating him too, and Kovalev was the favorite, but then beat him for the championship, and they're going to rematch. I don't think Kovalev has it in him to change. He knows how to crush. And if a guy can get around that stalking forward motion and heavy punches, move to the side, do other things, and so the thinking man is going to win the fight against the bruiser more often than not. That's why Ali won the second two fights. Frazier took him out in the first one. Ali made adjustments. Frazier made no adjustments. Kovalev doesn't make adjustments. That's why the second fight, in my opinion, went to Ali. He knew how to deal with the ebbs and flows of it. He knew how to deal with Frazier. He got in Frazier's mind. Frazier was beat before they stepped into the ring.
Yeah. Speaking of the end of the fight, can we, Miguel, take us through the last couple of rounds of the fight and what you saw, how you feel about it. Let's lead through the last couple of rounds here. We're starting to push on our time.
Well, I know at the end they're still swinging, but in general, a lot of people feel it's like this is the one down fight of the trilogy. And I think I have a tendency to disagree with that. I think this is a grueling 12-round fight. The guys were 15-round level already, so it had that non-title feel to it. But it's generally considered the lesser of the fights. But I think when you sit and watch the three, I think this one holds water up. And like I said, at the end, something strange happens in fighting when, at the end they hug and there's respect, after a war and stuff like that. That's not what happened at the end of this fight. There was no love lost and none of the animosity had been solved. It went Ali's way on the cards. I think, Frazier may have thought he was closer than he was on the cards. And, they were destined to meet again, obviously. So, that's one of the other things is that nothing was solved in the fight, so it makes it interesting, and it's definitely one to watch.
Scotty, anything you want to put on this one before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I would just suggest to our listeners to check out these trilogies. We talk pretty heavy in the HBO one if they want to go back and look at the HBO history, and then check this one out. True entertainment. I mean, heavyweights that were moving and that were energetic and were fast, and it really set us up for the heavyweight era in the modern age. It all really goes back to there. Of course, you go further back than that. Eddie Izzard, and I mean, we could go back and we could talk about a lot of champions before then. But if you chalk it up to the way the styles changed, to the way we were able to document it, I think Miguel mentioned, there have been other great trilogies, but as far as what we have on tape and you can go back and watch them, this was sort of the beginning, the golden time of that, and that set us up. It's sort of pre-Ali and post-Ali when it comes to the heavyweight division, in my opinion. And I don't even think he's the best heavyweight ever. I think he was the best at marketing and the best for the time, and we had TV and the whole thing. So it's a lot of factors that came together. But I would just suggest people to really go back and enjoy these fights after you listen to this podcast. Look them up; they're a hell of a lot of fun.
Hey, Miguel, one more thing I want to ask you before we check out. In terms of trilogies, okay, let's even say this. In terms of trilogies in heavyweight boxing history, in terms of trilogies, where do you put this one?
Oh, it's number one. It's number one in any trilogy.
Okay, great. Hey guys, this has been an awesome podcast on boxing history. Super glad to have had both of you. Anthony Scott Pyatt, boxing analyst, of course, archivist, genius boxing judge, expert, matchmaker, Miguel and Scotty, coming to you live from Costa Rica once again. Happy to have everybody here. Smash that subscribe button below if you like what we do. Tell somebody else. If you don't, tell us. We appreciate all the love we're getting, all the hate that we're getting. We'll take that too, because we need to know what we're doing wrong so that we can change it and make it right. Share this with everybody.
We're Ali and Frazier.
We are available on Facebook, on the Cage Rage Podcast Facebook page, etc. and so forth. So you can check us out on all the above places, Facebook or the CageRagePodcast.com. Cage Rage Podcast, look it up on YouTube, etc. and so forth. We've got 80-some videos on there and counting. We're building and we're just getting started, folks. Thanks for all the love. Until next time, namaste.